All right, the last thing we're going to do is talk about how to report the results of the dependent means t-test in APA style format. This should look fairly similar to the single sample t-test and the z-test, just now our tests are getting a little more complex, and so we have to provide a little more information. Okay. Similar to previous tests, we start by setting up a brief introduction to the research question, describing the method. Usually as a part of this, you indicate the N in the sample. Okay, so let's do the baby songs example. I actually wrote up this part here. And so when we're talking about an introduction to the research question, the method, and the N, any other pertinent information about the sample, for this study, it would look like what I have written here. Right, researchers want to see if babies like familiar songs more than unfamiliar songs. In the baseline phase, 32 babies, seated on their caregivers, watched a video that contained the smiling faces of two strangers. Then one of the individuals, who we're calling the familiar song stranger, sang a song that was familiar to the babies, and the other, who we're calling the unfamiliar song stranger, sang an unfamiliar song. Afterwards, in the after song phase, babies again watched a video of the two strangers smiling at them. In the baseline and after song phases, researchers recorded the proportion of time the baby spent looking at the familiar versus unfamiliar song stranger. So that just sets up all of the information that you need to know about the study. The next step is to provide the mean and standard deviation for the two sample variables and report and interpret the mean difference between those variables. All right, so here we are going back up to the output to get this information, right? The mean and standard deviation of baseline and after song looking times, and then also the mean difference. So I'm just going to grab this output and drag it down here so it's easier to reference. All right, so for this part, for the baby song study, we would say the mean fraction of time we spent looking at the familiar song stranger in the baseline was, we get that from here, so we could say 0.059, sorry, baseline is here, that's tricky, 0.521, or you could say 52.1%, the mean percent of time was 52.1, and then you report the standard deviation, which for baseline is 0.18, and in the after song phase, it was 0.593. Sorry, I'm just gonna stick to two decimals here. Sorry, it's 0.59, and you report the standard deviation of 0.18. Okay, so now we've done the first part. We provided the mean and standard deviation for the two sample variables, and then we're going to report and interpret the mean difference between those two sample variables. And here we have to look at number 4, which is the mean difference, right? And interpret that mean difference. Okay, so there's different ways you could phrase this, but I'm going to say, therefore, the proportion of time spent looking at the familiar song phase increased by 0.07 from baseline to after song phases. Okay, so that's that part. So now I'm gonna grab it and add it to the overall final report. So after we've done that, we're going to indicate that a paired sample t-test was conducted for the difference between the two variables, noting the significance level of the test and whether it was one or two-tailed. Okay, so let's say big let's say paired samples t-test, or you could say dependent means t-test, it's also totally fine, was conducted for the difference between baseline and post-song looking times. And we are going to say significance level is 0.05. You could also say just alpha equals 0.05. And it was a one-tailed test, right? Because we had a directional hypothesis. Okay, so that sets that up. And then immediately, I'm just going to highlight that so you can see what we're working on here. Immediately after that, then we provide the t-test results. Okay, and usually that just like we can put a comma after this information and then report the t-statistic, degrees of freedom, and p-value. And remember, we have to do it in a very specific format in APA style. This is similar to what you saw before for the single sample t-test. This is what it looks like. We report t and then the degrees of freedom, okay, which is right up here. So t brackets 31 is equal to, and then we report our t-statistic, which is right here, 2.42. And then lastly, we report our p-value right here. And with the p-value, you do always report the exact value up to the third decimal. 0.1. Sorry. Okay, so that's exactly how you need to report it. And that covers that step. So we're going to grab this and add it to the write-up. Okay, so now we are at the point where we're indicating whether or not all results were significant. And as always, if our p-value is less than the significance level, our results are significant. And another important part of this is considering the direction of your mean difference, okay? And if your results were significant and the sample mean was higher than the known population mean, which in this case was 0 for a dependent means t-test, you're reporting that the results were significantly higher, or if it was the opposite, it would be your results were significantly lower, okay? So for this example, what does this look like? Whether the results were significant and the direction. So we would say for the mean difference was significantly higher than 0. And in terms of this part, making sure you describe what the results mean in terms of difference or changed in the paired variables. The proportion of time looking at the familiar song Stranger increased from baseline to post-song video. Okay. Now, at this point, after you've reported the main results, you're going to make reference to the figure you've created in Excel by saying something like, these results are illustrated, or depicted, or described, or shown in figure 1. And then we're going to put figure 1, which we have here, and we're going to grab the title, figure 1, and then the kind of the description of the figure. That's going to go in your final write-up. It goes after the write-up, but we'll just paste it here. And we're not quite done. Okay, so there's where we are now. The last part is to report the effect size statistic and just indicate whether it was small, medium, or large. The effect was small. Report Cohen's D of, here's the effect size, 3. Make a concluding statement about whether the research hypothesis was supported. In this case, because anytime your results turn out to be significant, your research hypothesis is supported. We're going to indicate if the assumptions were met, just reporting the p-value for the Shapiro-Wilks test. All right, so for reporting normality, remember we're looking at the test of normality table and the Shapiro-Wilks line. All right, so all you're reporting is the p-value for the Shapiro-Wilks test. Say the assumption of normality was met, and then report Shapiro-Wilks p was equal to 0.745. All right, last part is the statistical power. We've already done these analyses in Jamovi. We have to look way up here again. Right, so remember the estimated power. We already calculated this was 76.3%. Just going to report that here. And power is less than 80%, so we're going to report how many we would need to achieve adequate power. To achieve adequate 80% power, we would need, calculate it here, we would need 36 participants, right? Okay, and I just went and cleaned that up a little bit, but that's what an APA style report of the results of a dependent means or paired sample t-test look like. You have your write-up here. Make sure you incorporate all of these elements in the instructions, and then you have your figure illustrating the results.